Nidal Malik Hasan was sentenced to death on August 28, 2013, by a unanimous panel of 13 military officers for killing 13 American soldiers at Fort Hood, Texas. He was a United States Army major. He was a psychiatrist. His job was to treat the mental wounds of soldiers coming home from war. He murdered the people he was sworn to serve. If you follow cases where the system had the information to stop what happened and chose not to act on it, subscribe now. That failure is written into the official Senate record on this case, word for word. The victims. We start there, because the story of what was destroyed matters more than the story of who destroyed it. Michael Grant Cahill was 62 years old, a civilian physician assistant and retired Army Reserve veteran from Cameron, Texas, who had suffered a heart attack 2 weeks before November 5, 2009, and came back to work after only 1 week of recovery. He was helping soldiers through their pre-deployment physicals when Hasan opened fire. Cahill threw a chair at him in an attempt to stop the attack. He was shot and killed. His daughter Keely Vanacker said, "He survived that. He was getting back on track, and he gets killed by a gunman." Lieutenant Colonel Juanita L. Warman was 55 years old, a 25-year Army veteran from Maryland, daughter and granddaughter of Army veterans, a physician assistant who had specialized in treating post-traumatic stress disorder and had received an Army Commendation Medal for her work with wounded warriors at Landstuhl Regional Medical Center in Germany. She pushed another soldier out of the line of fire before Hasan shot her in the abdomen. She had 2 daughters and 6 grandchildren. She was preparing to deploy to Iraq. She was buried at Arlington National Cemetery. Major Libardo Eduardo Caraveo was 52 years old, born in Ciudad Juarez, Mexico, who had immigrated to the United States as a teenager, earned a doctorate in psychology from the University of Arizona, worked with bilingual special needs students in Tucson, and entered the Army after years in private practice. He lived in Woodbridge, Virginia. Captain Russell Gilbert Seeger was 51 years old, from Racine, Wisconsin, an Army Reserve captain and psychiatrist who was preparing for deployment. Captain John P. Gaffani was 56 years old, from Serra Mesa, California, a registered nurse who had left a civilian career to join the Army approximately 1 year before the shooting. He threw a chair at Hasan. He was shot and killed for it. At the 1-year memorial, when his act was described, the crowd rose to its feet. Staff Sergeant Justin Michael DeCrow was 32 years old, from Plymouth, Indiana. He was a newlywed. He had already served a tour in Iraq. Specialist Frederick Green was 29 years old, from Mountain City, Tennessee. Sergeant Amy Kruger was 29 years old, from Kiel, Wisconsin. She enlisted after the September 11th attacks. She had arrived at Fort Hood just 2 days before the shooting and was scheduled to deploy to Afghanistan in December. Her mother, Jerry Kruger, told reporters that after 9/11, Amy had vowed to take on Osama bin Laden. When her mother said she could not take him on alone, Amy said, "Watch me." Private First Class. Aaron Thomas Nemelka was 19 years old, from West Jordan, Utah, the youngest victim killed that day. He had chosen to enlist instead of serving a mission for the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. He was preparing to deploy to Afghanistan in January 2010. His mother, Tina Nemelka, was photographed at the 2015 Purple Heart ceremony, embracing the mother of the next soldier on this list. Private First Class Michael S. Pearson was 22 years old, from Bolingbrook, Illinois. Specialist Jason Dean Hunt, known as J.D., was 22 years old, from Norman, Oklahoma. He had re-enlisted for 6 years after his initial 2-year assignment. His mother, Gail Hunt, said, "He didn't go in for hunting or sports. He was a very quiet boy who enjoyed video games." 2 uniformed soldiers came to her door late on the night of November 5th to tell her what happened. Private Francisca Velez was 21 years old, from Chicago, known to friends as Cheka. She had served a tour in Iraq, had been back in the United States for only 3 days when she was killed, and had been transferred to Fort Hood, specifically because of her pregnancy. She was filling out paperwork in the processing center. She was planning a career in the Army. Her friend Sasha Ramos described her as the most fun and happy person you could know. Her father, Juan Guillermo Velez, said, "What hurts the most is that one of her own killed her, and in her own house, the base where there should have been security." Francesca's unborn child also died. The child was not counted among the 13 official murder counts for which Hasan was convicted. Her family has carried that absence ever since. Private First Class Kam Sheong was 23 years old, from St. Paul, Minnesota. He had immigrated from Thailand as a child, graduated from Community of Peace Academy in 2004, and was a husband and a father. He was at Fort Hood, preparing for a January 2010 deployment. Among the 32 who were wounded and survived, Staff Sergeant Patrick Ziegler was shot 4 times, including through the left side of his head. He survived, but Hasan's bullets left his left side partially paralyzed. At sentencing, Ziegler told the court, "I was expected to either die or remain in a vegetative state." Staff Sergeant Sean Manning was shot 6 times. As of 2015, 2 of Hasan's bullets remained in his body, 1 in his leg, 1 in his back. He developed PTSD. He was later denied combat-related injury benefits by a physical evaluation board, even after receiving the Purple Heart. He became one of the most publicly vocal survivors. Civilian Police Sergeant Kimberly Munley was the first law enforcement officer on scene. She exchanged fire with Hasan outside the building. Hasan shot her twice after she had already wounded him. The public record does not contain detailed biographical information for all named wounded victims. That absence is itself part of the story. 32 people walked into that building that morning and left carrying what Hasan had done to them. Not every name fills in fully in the official record. That does not mean those names matter less. Now the man who did it. Nidal Malik Hasan was born on September 8, 1970 in Arlington, Virginia. His parents were Palestinian immigrants who had settled in Virginia and ran a restaurant. He enlisted in the Army out of high school, and the Army funded everything that followed. Community College, then Virginia Tech, where he graduated in 1995 with a Bachelor of Science in Biochemistry with honors. Then the Uniformed Services University of the Health Sciences in Bethesda, where he earned his medical degree in 2003. He completed his internship, residency, and fellowship in psychiatry at Walter Reed Army Medical Center, including a fellowship in disaster and preventive psychiatry at the Center for Traumatic Stress. In 2009, he received a Master of Public Health degree. In May 2009, he was promoted to Major. He was transferred to Fort Hood, Texas in July. To anyone outside the institution, he looked like the Army at its best. An immigrant family's son, a physician, a decorated academic career, steadily ascending rank. That was the public face. The institutional record is a different document entirely. Throughout his 6 years at Walter Reed, from 2003 to 2009, Hasan was chronically absent. He was on probation multiple times. His program director considered him very lazy and described him as a religious fanatic. He was reprimanded more than once for attempting to convert patients to Islam, which violated both professional medical ethics and military conduct standards. On May 17, 2007, a supervisor sent a formal written memorandum to Walter Reed's Credentials Committee documenting serious concerns about CPT Hasan's professionalism and work ethic. That memorandum went into his official file. Nothing in his career trajectory changed. Also in 2007, Hasan delivered a Grand Rounds presentation at Walter Reed titled, "Is the War on Terror a War on Islam? An Islamic Perspective?" His classmates erupted in protest after approximately 2 minutes. The presentation justified suicide bombings, offered a defense of Osama bin Laden, and argued that anger at the United States was justified. Colleagues filed complaints. No disciplinary action followed. In 2008, Hasan produced a research project arguing that if U.S. military operations constituted a war against Islam, Muslim soldiers faced a choice between God and country, in which, as Hasan framed it, the Quran dictated that God must come first. The project included the phrase, "We love death more than you love life." His officer evaluation report for 2007 to 2008, written by the department chair of psychiatry at Walter Reed, described this ideologically driven work as having extraordinary potential to inform national policy and military strategy. 2 officers at Walter Reed described Hasan during his residency and fellowship as a ticking time bomb. That phrase appears in the Senate Homeland Security Committee's 2011 report. It was documented. It was known. Beginning December 17, 2008, Hasan exchanged 18 emails with Anwar al-Awlaki, a U.S.-born al-Qaeda cleric in Yemen who was already under FBI investigation. The FBI's San Diego Joint Terrorism Task Force intercepted these emails. In one of them, Hasan wrote, "I would assume that a suicide bomber whose aim is to kill enemy soldiers or their helpers, but also kills innocents in the process, is acceptable." He asked al-Awlaki whether suicide bombings against U.S. soldiers were religiously permissible. He expressed support for Hamas. He asked how he could send al-Awlaki funds. The San Diego JTTF passed a memo to the FBI's Washington field office in January 2009. The file sat unassigned for nearly 2 months. When it was finally assigned to a DCIS agent, the agent delayed starting his review by another 90 days. When he began in May 2009, he checked databases, found that Hasan's military record was positive, and concluded the emails were consistent with psychiatric research. He did not interview Hasan. He did not notify Hasan's chain of command at the Department of Defense. The investigation was closed. The Washington field office explicitly described investigating a Muslim soldier who visited extremist websites as politically sensitive. One agent reportedly told the San Diego office, "WFO doesn't go out and interview every Muslim guy who visits extremist websites." This framing, that political sensitivity drove the inaction, was asserted by Representative Mike McCall and by the Webster Commission's own documentation. The FBI's counterterrorism official, Mark Giuliano, testified that he attributed the failure to structural and procedural breakdowns rather than political caution. The Webster Commission, which issued a 173-page report in July 2012, identified both structural failures in how leads were assigned and shared across jurisdictions, and a cultural reluctance to act. Both were real. The Senate Homeland Security Committee called the Washington JTTF's decision not to interview Hasan and not to notify the Department of Defense the last, best chance to potentially prevent the November 2009 massacre at Fort Hood. There is one more institutional failure worth naming precisely. The San Diego JTTF forwarded only 2 of the 18 emails to Washington. The remaining 16, including Hasan's most explicit endorsements of suicide bombing against soldiers, were not linked to the original December 2008 intercept. They were treated as a separate matter. The connections were never drawn. The officer who arranged Hasan's transfer to Fort Hood later admitted to a colleague there, "You're getting our worst." In the immediate run-up to November 5, 2009, the planning was deliberate and documented. On July 31, 2009, Hasan walked into Guns Galore in Killeen, Texas, and asked for the most technologically advanced weapon on the market and the one with the highest standard magazine capacity. 3 people in the store recommended the FN57 semi-automatic pistol. A customer spent approximately an hour explaining its operation. The following day, August 1st, Hasan returned and purchased the 5.7, along with laser sights and magazine extension kits that brought firing capacity to 30 rounds per magazine. In October 2009, Hasan joined an outdoor shooting range in Florence, Texas, approximately 20 miles south of Killeen. He visited once or twice a week. He chose silhouette targets, not bullseye targets. He aimed at the head and chest from 100 yards. A range witness testified that Hasan received instruction in speed-loading the weapon and became proficient at kill shots from that distance. The range owner noted the targeting. Most training focuses on center mass. Hasan was aiming for the head. Approximately 2 days before the attack, Hasan began giving away his belongings to a neighbor. He had dinner with a friend from his mosque and told him he felt he was supposed to quit, explaining that the Quran dictated Muslims were not supposed to engage in alliances with people of Christian or Jewish faith, and that to fight against Muslims as a Muslim meant going to hell. He had already retained legal counsel to explore options for leaving the army. He was scheduled to deploy to Afghanistan the following month. His cousin Nidal Hasan described him as mortified by the idea of having to deploy. On November 5, 2009, Hasan attended morning prayers at his mosque. Then he drove to Fort Hood in his Army combat uniform. At approximately 1:34 in the afternoon, he walked into the Soldier Readiness Processing Center. The building held 300 to 400 soldiers and civilians. It was an administrative facility. Soldiers were processing paperwork, receiving vaccines, completing the last administrative tasks before deployment or on return from overseas. Weapons were not permitted inside. None of the people in that building were armed. Hasan sat down briefly at a processing table. He stood. He bowed his head. He shouted, "Allahu Akbar," and opened fire. He was carrying the FN-57 with laser sights and extended magazines, and a Smith & Wesson .357 Magnum revolver. He never used the revolver. The red laser sight was visible to everyone who saw it. Multiple survivors described watching that dot move before the shots came. Michael Grant Cahill threw a chair at Hasan and was shot and killed. Captain John Gaffney charged at Hasan and was shot and killed. Lieutenant Colonel Juanita Warman pushed another soldier out of the line of fire. Then Hasan shot her in the abdomen. She died. Hasan moved through the building and kept firing. He fired approximately 214 rounds. The attack lasted approximately 10 minutes. Staff Sergeant Sean Manning was shot 6 times. At some point, bleeding on the floor, Manning lay still and pretended to be dead, afraid Hasan would return to finish off the wounded. Hasan moved outside the building and continued firing. He aimed the laser sight at a site worker named Toro, the red dot crossing his chest. He did not shoot. Civilian Police Sergeant Kimberly Munley arrived in her patrol car. She engaged Hasan outside the building, exchanging fire with her 9mm M9 pistol. She wounded him. Hasan then shot Munley twice. He approached her and attempted to pick up her weapon. His arm would not respond. He had been wounded and the paralysis was beginning. Sergeant Mark Todd arrived. He fired. Hasan fell and lost consciousness. The attack was over. Of the 13 killed, 11 died at the scene. 2 died in hospital. Hasan's bullets killed Francesca Velez's unborn child alongside her. Staff Sergeant Patrick Ziegler, shot through the left side of his head and 3 more times, was taken from the scene with injuries so severe that doctors expected him to die or remain in a vegetative state. He survived. Hasan was taken into custody at the scene. His spinal injuries from Sergeant Todd's shots paralyzed him from the waist down. He has been in a wheelchair ever since. The Army Criminal Investigation Division processed the scene. The evidence assembled fast. Hasan's FN-57, the unfired .357 Magnum, extended magazines and laser sights, hundreds of spent casings, purchase records from Guns Galore, range membership and practice records from Florence, his emails to Al-Awlaki, his prior presentations at Walter Reed, his military record. On November 12, 2009, the Army charged him with 13 counts of premeditated murder. On December 2nd, they added 32 counts of attempted premeditated murder. All charges were filed under the Uniform Code of Military Justice. In custody, Hasan grew a beard that violated Army regulations and triggered a series of pre-trial procedural disputes. He was ordered forcibly shaved to appear in uniform. He challenged that order on appeal to a military court on religious freedom grounds, and he won that ruling. It was one of the few legal victories he would have. He was found competent to stand trial in a sanity board review. He elected to represent himself. The court-martial opened on August 6, 2013, before Colonel Tara Osborne with a panel of 13 senior military officers. Because of Hasan's self-representation, the court appointed standby defense counsel who raised concerns more than once that Hasan appeared to be assisting the prosecution in securing the death penalty he seemed to want. Judge Osborne denied their request to withdraw, telling Hasan directly, "You're the captain of your own ship." Under military law, defendants cannot plead guilty in capital cases. Hasan reportedly wished to plead guilty on all counts. Instead, in his opening statement, he told the jury, "The evidence will show that I was the shooter." The prosecution presented more than 80 witnesses, forensic evidence, Hasan's purchase and range records, the full email exchange with Al-Awlaki, his Walter Reed presentations, and detailed medical and ballistic testimony. Lead prosecutor Colonel Mike Mulligan told the jury in sentencing, "He'll never be a martyr. This is not his gift to God. This is his debt to society. This is the cost of his murderous rampage." Hasan called no witnesses. He presented no evidence. He conducted no meaningful cross-examination in either phase. In the sentencing phase, when his opportunity to speak arrived, he said 3 words: "The defense rests." The courtroom gasped. On August 23, 2013, the panel found Hasan guilty on all 13 counts of premeditated murder and all 32 counts of attempted premeditated murder. He showed no visible reaction. On August 28th, after less than 2 hours of deliberation, the 13-officer panel sentenced him to death by lethal injection. The vote was unanimous. A single dissenting vote would have meant life imprisonment instead. Hasan appealed. The Army Court of Criminal Appeals affirmed the conviction and sentence. He appealed to the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Armed Forces. In September 2023, in a unanimous decision with no dissent, that court rejected his motion to reverse the death sentence. He filed a petition for certiorari to the U.S. Supreme Court on August 1, 2024. The Department of Justice filed a 32-page response on February 21, 2025, arguing the conviction was appropriate and had been affirmed through every appellate stage. On March 31, 2025, the Supreme Court declined to hear the case. As of mid-2026, Hasan sits on death row at the United States Disciplinary Barracks at Fort Leavenworth, Kansas, paralyzed and wheelchair-bound. Every standard military appellate avenue has been exhausted. Federal habeas corpus proceedings remain theoretically available. None have been filed. Under military law, the President of the United States must personally approve a military execution before it can be carried out. Secretary of War Pete Hegseth stated publicly in September 2025, "I am 100% committed to ensuring the death penalty is carried out for Nidal Hasan. This savage terrorist deserves the harshest lawful punishment for his 2009 mass shooting at Fort Hood. The victims and survivors deserve justice without delays. No death warrant has been signed. No execution date has been set. The last U.S. military execution was carried out on April 13, 1961. The Ronald Gray case offers a reference point. Gray received presidential approval for execution in 2008, and as of 2025, that execution had still not been carried out. Julia Wilson, who was 9 months pregnant during the shooting and survived, said in 2025, "I'm 100% hoping they execute Hasan and support bringing him back to Texas for the execution." The workplace violence classification applied to the Fort Hood shooting by the Department of Defense under the Obama administration has never been formally rescinded. That classification cost victims years of Purple Heart eligibility and combat-related benefits. Congress acted in December 2014, passing legislation that expanded Purple Heart eligibility to cover domestic terrorist attacks inspired by foreign organizations. The Army awarded 42 Purple Hearts at a Fort Hood ceremony on April 10, 2015. Staff Sergeant Sean Manning, shot 6 times, was still denied combat-related injury benefits by a physical evaluation board that same year, despite receiving his Purple Heart. Some survivors continue to navigate that gap today. 13 people left for work on November 5, 2009, and did not come home. 19-year-old Aaron Nemelka, 21-year-old Francesca Velez and her unborn child, Jason Dean Hunt and Michael Pearson, both 22, Cam Xiong, 23, Frederick Green and Amy Kruger, both 29, Justin DeCrow, 32, Libardo Caraveo, 52, Russell Seeger, 51, John Gaffney, 56, Juanita Warman, 55, Michael Grant Cahill, 62, back at work after a heart attack because there were soldiers who needed help getting ready to deploy. The system had everything it needed to stop Hasan before he walked into that building. The emails were intercepted. The presentations were documented. The memorandum was in the file. 2 officers had already called him a ticking time bomb. None of it moved anyone to act. 9 of Hasan's supervisors at Walter Reed received letters of reprimand following the Senate investigation. No criminal charges were filed against any of them. Here is the question this case leaves open. Nidal Hasan has sat on military death row for more than 12 years. Every appeal is exhausted. The last U.S. military execution was 64 years ago. Should the U.S. military retain the death penalty if it demonstrably cannot carry it out? Or does the length of this delay compound the injustice done to these victims rather than correct it? Drop your answer in the comments. Subscribe if you want to follow cases where the warnings were real, the record was documented, and the system failed anyway. This one is not finished yet.